Welcome back to the Psych History channel. In the final episode of the series, we begin to analyze Genghis Khan through a psychological lens. Parts 1 and 2 outline the factors and reasoning that underpin this analysis. We recommend viewing them on our channel first to understand the contextual basis of the analysis. Please note that this is not a clinical diagnosis, and to suggest one would be considered unethical. Our intent is to highlight biopsychosocial factors and patterns that are known to align with particular psychological theories and frameworks, to explain why a person may behave in certain ways. Across Khan's life, several patterns stand out, particularly his use of extreme violence and swift, brutal responses to betrayal or resistance. The killing of his half-brother Bektir, the annihilation of cities that defied him, and his delight in revenge all point to a readiness to escalate force and a low threshold for mercy outside his in-group. He attracted followers through personal courage, fairness in sharing spoils, and a promise of advancement by merit. He could inspire intense loyalty and was capable of maintaining long-term cooperative relationships with diverse allies, even former enemies. He absorbed military technologies and administrative ideas from many cultures, reorganized his army and society in innovative ways, and adjusted tactics based on context. This reflects high cognitive flexibility and long-term planning. He interpreted his successes as proof that eternal heaven had chosen him. He framed his conquests as fulfilling a divine mission, and saw refusal to submit as a moral, almost cosmic offense. Early betrayals seem to have left a lasting mark. He relied heavily on a small, trusted circle, and dealt harshly with anyone suspected of disloyalty, even longtime associates. Sources describe him as controlled, not prone to visible emotional breakdown despite repeated traumas. This could reflect a learned suppression of vulnerability or emotional numbing. He not only used terror strategically, some accounts suggest he took personal satisfaction in vengeance, speaking of joy in crushing enemies and seeing their loved ones in tears. That hints at an enjoyment of domination that goes beyond pure utilitarian logic. Many of his behaviors align with antisocial or psychopathic traits: chronic disregard for the rights and lives of others, repeated acts of violence and deceit, and a lack of recorded remorse for mass killings. He orchestrated campaigns that killed vast numbers and justified them as necessary or deserved. He was fearless, manipulative, and highly effective in predatory contexts. However, context matters. In a highly violent environment where such traits were rewarded, his behavior may reflect adaptive strategies rather than a clinical disorder in the modern sense. Still, if we applied today's criteria, he would likely show a significant cluster of antisocial traits: low empathy toward outgroups, instrumental use of people, and readiness to violate norms when it served his goals. Genghis Khan displayed a grandiose self-image rooted in divine chosenness. He expected universal deference, interpreted opposition as illegitimate, and sought a legacy that would outlive him by centuries. This fits a narcissistic pattern of entitlement and a need for dominance. At the same time, he showed some traits not typical of fragile narcissism. He could admit mistakes, listen to criticism, and live relatively simply without ostentatious displays. That combination, grandiose vision with operational pragmatism, is more consistent with what some commentators call malignant narcissism, overlapping narcissistic and antisocial features anchored in power, paranoia, and aggression. His childhood involved repeated traumatic events: loss of his father, clan abandonment, starvation, captivity, and fratricidal violence. Modern trauma research suggests such experiences can lead to hypervigilance, emotional numbing, distrust, and aggressive responses to perceived threats. We see echoes of this in his sensitivity to disloyalty, his preemptive strikes on potential rivals, and his tendency to frame the world in terms of existential threat and domination. While we cannot document symptoms like flashbacks, his behavioral pattern is consistent with someone who learned to survive by controlling and eliminating perceived dangers before they could strike. His suspicion of rivals, elimination of charismatic figures who grew too influential, and extreme reactions to betrayal point toward a paranoid style. He expected loyalty but always seemed poised for treachery. Again, on the step, this was not entirely irrational. Betrayal was common, But the intensity of his responses suggests a deeply ingrained mistrust. Although not a formal DSM-5 personality disorder, sadistic traits involve deriving pleasure from others' suffering. Some of Genghis Khan's statements and the celebratory tone of certain revenge episodes in Mongol chronicles suggest that at least part of him enjoyed the assertion of absolute power in crushing enemies. When cruelty is not just a tool, but emotionally satisfying, that edges into sadistic territory. Important to highlight alternative, non-pathologizing explanations. Pre-modern warfare was extraordinarily brutal across many societies. Massacres, enslavement, and public mutilations were not unique to the Mongols. Genghis Khan may have amplified these practices, but he did not invent them. Some of what we see as disorder may simply reflect the harsh norms of his context. Many of his cruelest acts can be read as ruthless but rational strategy, terrorizing a few to save resources later, eliminating rival elites to prevent rebellion, using fear as a psychological weapon. A cold strategist can look psychopathic without necessarily having a mental disorder. There are no reliable accounts of hallucinations, delusions unrelated to culturally shared beliefs, or dramatic mood swings. He appears consistently focused, rational in strategic terms, and emotionally stable. This argues against psychotic or bipolar disorders. Perhaps most importantly, he made choices. Other leaders endured trauma or commanded armies, yet opted for different levels of brutality. His personality, experiences, and values interacted in a way that produced Genghis Khan, but nothing made his path inevitable. In summary, we might conceptualize him as having a personality optimized for conquest, aggressive, low in empathy for outsiders, highly intelligent, strategically flexible, and driven by trauma-fueled determination and grandiose vision. That combination proved devastatingly effective and devastatingly destructive. How you see Genghis Khan today depends heavily on where you stand. In Mongolia, he is Genghis Khan, national founder, almost a sacred figure. Despite Soviet attempts to suppress his cult, post-communist Mongolia has embraced him as the core symbol of national identity. His name crowns airports, universities, vodkas. His face is on currency, colossal statues dominate public spaces. Here the emphasis is on unity, law, and pride. The massacres abroad are backgrounded. The unification of the Mongols and the birth of a state are front and center. Chinese memory. His image is more complicated. Historically, Han Chinese accounts portrayed him as a foreign conqueror whose forces caused great suffering. But modern Chinese state narratives increasingly integrate him as part of a multi-ethnic Chinese past. The Yuan dynasty, founded by his grandson Kublai, is counted as a legitimate Chinese dynasty. Genghis is sometimes presented as a unifier of China's northern frontier, his conquests reframed as part of a continuous Chinese story. This reinterpretation serves both to honor Mongol heritage within China and to extend China's historical reach. In Iran and much of the Islamic world, he remains a near pure villain. The Mongol invasions are remembered as the Mongol catastrophe, a civilizational trauma associated with the end of the Islamic Golden Age in many regions. Persian chronicles describe unimaginable slaughter and devastation. Genghis Khan's name is invoked as shorthand for brutal destruction. There has been little attempt to rehabilitate him. Here he is not a lawgiver or innovator. He is the destroyer whose shadow still looms over collective memory. In medieval and early modern Europe, and especially in Russia, Genghis Khan and his successors embodied the terrifying other from the east. Russian tradition speaks of the Tatar yoke, associating Mongol rule with backwardness and suffering. In Western Europe, he became a symbol of barbaric tyranny, used in political rhetoric and literature as a benchmark of cruelty. More recently, some Western authors have swung to the opposite extreme, portraying him as a misunderstood modernizer or proto-globalizer. Serious scholarship tends to strike a balance, recognizing his remarkable organizational and geopolitical impact, while firmly acknowledging the immense human cost. These divergent memories tell us that Genghis Khan is not just a figure in history, he is a tool of identity. Hero, villain, ancestor, or warning, he becomes what each society most needs him to be. Over 8 centuries, layers of legend have built up around Genghis Khan. Let's separate some common myths from what the evidence actually supports. Myth: Genghis was a one-dimensional, uniquely evil monster. Reality: he was devastatingly violent, but also strategic, pragmatic, and sometimes even tolerant. His behavior fits his era's norms of warfare, amplified by scale and efficiency. Reducing him to a cartoon villain obscures the more disturbing truth that an intelligent, disciplined, at times just leader can also perpetrate enormous atrocities. He always massacred everyone, even if they surrendered. Reality: his pattern was surrender and be integrated, or resist and face annihilation. Many cities that opened their gates early were spared large-scale killing, though heavily taxed and conscripted. It was resistance, betrayal, or killing envoys that triggered his harshest reprisals. Myth: the Mongols won by endless hordes. Reality: they were often outnumbered. Their strength lay in mobility, training, archery, discipline, and command and control. The image of a mindless human wave hides a sophisticated military machine. Myth: 1 in every 200 men today is definitely descended from Genghis Khan. Reality: genetic studies show a widespread Y chromosome lineage, originating in medieval Mongolia, likely linked to a powerful male line such as the Mongol royal family. It could be Genghis himself, but the evidence is not conclusive. The father of millions headline is best seen as a striking hypothesis, not a proven fact. Myth: Genghis Khan was a champion of modern democracy, human rights, and women's liberation. Reality: he was an autocratic conqueror. He did institute religious toleration, some legal protections, and a degree of female status that surpassed many contemporaries. But these policies were grounded in pragmatism and steppe culture, not modern liberal values. Recent portrayals of him as a proto-democrat are romanticized repackagings, not faithful history. Myth: he died in some dramatic, cursed fashion, and his tomb carries a deadly curse. Reality: he most likely died of illness or injuries from a fall during campaign. The elaborate tomb legends, rivers diverted, massacres of witnesses, apocalyptic curses, emerge from folklore and heroic storytelling. His burial site remains unknown, more out of historical chance and Mongol secrecy than supernatural design. Peeling back these myths doesn't make his story less impressive. If anything, the reality of a flawed, brilliant, terrifyingly effective human being is more compelling than any legend. Before we close, an important note. All psychological interpretations in this episode are hypothetical. They are based on historical records that are themselves incomplete and biased. Modern diagnostic systems like the DSM-5 did not exist in the 13th century. And we cannot clinically assess a man who has been dead for 800 years. Here should be understood as a thought experiment, a way of organizing evidence and asking questions, not a definitive diagnosis of Genghis Khan's mental health. Genghis Khan's life is a reminder that history is driven not just by armies and maps, but by minds. A boy abandoned on the steppe transformed his fear and hunger into relentless will. He forged a new social order out of chaos, then unleashed it on the world. In him we see the extremes of human potential, creativity and destruction, law-giving and law-breaking, loyalty and betrayal, all in one person. When we look beyond the myth and into the mind, we try to ask uncomfortable questions. How much of his ruthlessness came from trauma? How much from culture? How much from choice? And what does it mean that a personality so optimized for conquest could reshape half the known world in a single lifetime? History shapes our world, but psychology shapes the people who shape history. If you'd like to explore more about the historical figures and legends, subscribe and join us for future episodes. Your support is much appreciated and help us to create a higher quality videos. Comment below. Which historical figures' psychology should we unmask next?